You are listening to 104.1 KQTH, Tucson's News and Talk. I am the beautiful man. We got the sexy sidekick close at hand. Charles in charge. Take your call to 751-1041. We have the Sensei, Jeff Utsch, in studio. Jeff Utsch deals in real estate in the Tucson area. He's also a tactical swim instructor for one of America's elite fighting forces, the Navy SEALs. But on Mondays, we get to have his expertise in studio to discuss today's issues filtered through the Constitution. Jeff Utsch, welcome to the circus.
Great to be here.
You know,
beautiful Monday.
It is a gorgeous Monday. Gorgeous Monday. You know, I just had Representative Gosar on.
I heard some of it.
You know,
some of it. Not
a lot
all
of my audience is really frustrated with today's budget deals, and they're frustrated with Congress, and they were frustrated with him. But when I was listening to him, I wasn't really frustrated with Gosar. Angry, vented. As a matter of fact, he appreciated me letting him come on to the show and vent because he's frustrated as well. But if you were listening real closely, he laid once again the fault for this, what we're experiencing, to the process from leadership, from Speaker Ryan, from the way that they want to give you this 1,500-page bill and you're supposed to be ready to go in 2 or 3 days, all that kind of stuff. The same shenanigans the left was playing, we have the establishment playing now, and it really gets down to the issue of, these omnibus or whatever, the healthcare, take it or leave it. That's not how things should be happening.
Absolutely not. Look, you just go back to the Federalist Papers. They talked about, now I didn't hear all of the Gosar interview, but what I did hear, I thought he was spot on. I want your listeners to remember that we were very supportive of the Freedom Caucus when they were getting hammered by many on the right for thwarting the original health care bill. But it wasn't hard to stand up for the Freedom Caucus because we were capitulating on so many things. We were coming off being principled without even a fight and going immediately to pragmatic and then rationalizing this. And the Freedom Caucus, thank goodness, stood up, and we wrote an article on this, comparing what Frodo went through in the Lord of the Rings and how he kind of bashed his Samwise, and Frodo didn't hear what Samwise wanted to say. We compared Frodo to the establishment, Samwise to the Freedom Caucus, and Sam just kind of took the beatings, but he was right. Gollum really did want to destroy him. He really did have ulterior motives. And so in the end, we see this playing out. Hopefully the health care bill will be, it has been better, but hopefully they can do something with it now. But even now, as Gosar pointed out, it's not repeal, and it certainly isn't a total replacement. It's placating because we are not standing on principle. And I have a few reasons of why we're not doing that in just a minute. But the other part of the budget issues, I think Congressman Gosar was spot on there too. And look, we are lucky to have somebody like him. We're also lucky to have Congressman Schweikert, a part of this Freedom Caucus, a part of standing up and doing what's right rather than just placating and thinking about, okay, well, this is the way we have to do things. So we're lucky to have them. But with the budget bill, from being a school teacher, when the new kids come in and you have a new grade, you don't let them go wild the first day and then tell the principal, well, I'll start to rein them in. We're just letting them, we're just kind of feeling it out. You set down the law the first day, and then as they get more comfortable with you and you with them, you might be able to relax that a little bit. But if you don't set down the rules, the time there is a change historically is when you can make the greatest change. It's also the time of greatest risk that we talked about before. But if you want to have a revolution in the direction that America is going, instead of just postponing the inevitable, should I say, decline, we are already in decline as measured by a lot of different things we've gone over on the show before. But if you want to put more fuel in the rocket instead of it coming down and the state going back up, you can't just do these little things. You've got to take the jar and put the big rocks in first. Right now, they're filling it with sand. And how are they going to get the big rocks in first? They're setting precedent. The other side is gaining power because they're looking at this saying, look what we can do. These guys do not have the courage of their convictions. They don't. They're ready to just run the other way. So we are setting bad precedent for people who think it's going to get better unless there is a major change in attitude, and soon we are sorely mistaken. This budget takes us till for the 1st of October. And so if we think all of a sudden there's going to be major change in the way things happen between now and then, and we're not ready to batten down the hatches and have the fight now, I think we're sorely mistaken, and time will tell.
Well, see, that just begs the question, though. It was perfect when you said these Congress people do not have the courage of their convictions. You're absolutely correct about that. And I think it's even worse than that, Jeff Utsch.
I think Paul Gosar is an exception to that.
Well, I think he is an exception, and I think that the Freedom Caucus are full of exceptions, and that's why they stood on principle to try to change the Obamacare bill as much as they could. But at the end of the day, you have establishment, you have leadership in the party that does not want to see Obamacare repealed. You have leadership in Congress who does not want to see funds for sanctuary cities dry up, does not want to see the EPA diminished, does not want to see Planned Parenthood's funds cut off. They don't want to see a wall built. So then you start.
But why is that?
Well, I'm about to say you have to ask the question,
okay.
Why?
Okay. Well, there could be many reasons why, and that could differ from each congressman or congresswoman out there. But my feeling is because they don't want to rock the boat. And it is easier to maintain power and the status quo, with the status quo, than trying to change things up. And the reason they don't want to change things up too much is because then they become targets. That's their perception. And they have a fear of getting voted out of office. So I think they're governed by fear instead of governing by conviction right now.
But what is the base of their fear? I don't think their fear is necessarily being thrown out of office. I think it's more insidious than that. I think they've been bought off. I mean, really, I think...
Okay. All right. Well, that goes to the fear of losing office, because if they don't play the game, then the moneyed will come after them. But it goes into right in for what I was saying. They're afraid of losing the perception game. That's number one. They do not think in this culture of political correctness that they can win the game of perception. And somehow they're afraid to engage in reality because they've been losing that battle for a long time.
But see, have they been losing the battle, Jeff Utsch? Have we been losing the battle, or have we, the American people, just now started to see what we're up against in Washington, D.C.? When we start talking about draining the swamp, and I was reminded of this today because of just how funky this whole omnibus bill was. I remembered Eric Cantor, who was next in line to be Speaker of the House. Sure. And I remember how, a couple of young guns went after him. And because he neglected his district, his home district, he ended up losing. And how that really rocked the establishment in Washington, D.C. That rocked them. They didn't see that coming. The next thing you had was Boehner, having to resign before he was embarrassingly, dethroned as a Speaker of the House. Now you have Paul Ryan in there, but they're no different. They're still doing the same thing. So whose bidding are they doing if they're not doing the bidding of the American people?
Well, I don't think that they're learning from what they've just gone through. I don't think they're learning. Look, I think they're afraid of losing the perception game, losing their jobs, losing their power, being outmaneuvered. Look, let me compare it to this. McClellan in the Civil War, was given the Army of the Potomac, which vastly outnumbered the Army of Northern Virginia, But McClellan really, he loved the position of power. He did. But his goal, he did want to win the war, but he was more afraid of losing than he was of winning. And he made a great big fanfare, gave great talks about how he was going to whip the South quick and do all these things. And he took his ships down to the peninsula and moved his armies up and made all this great fanfare and trying to maneuver big things. But in the end, he did not have the conviction of his conscience. He did not understand that to win was going to take everything he had, and it was going to require great risk. But because he was not willing to take that huge risk, even with, the odds in his favor greatly, he had the momentum with him. Instead, he was willing to accept small victories, little pieces.
There was one that he lost outside of.
Well, Richmond was the big one where he lost. He came up the peninsula with 140,000 troops, and the Confederates had about 80 to 90,000 and beat them pretty badly. But even then, he could have regrouped and taken it. But instead, he was running away. It is, we are being outgeneraled. That's the point. We have the troops. We have the ability to win, but we are being outgeneraled. There's no question about that. But on the other side, I'm hoping to get into some more whys and what's going on. And we also have what Benjamin Franklin, some quotes on what he thought about what's going on today.
I love it when you bring history into the fray, my friend. We have Jeff Utsch in studio. You're listening to 104.1 KQTH. So I was trying to when the sensei was talking about McClellan, I'm like, wait a minute, that name's familiar. So I said, we were at the battlefield. I think we were talking about here, and I brought up some pictures from my trip out there, and he's like, Antietam. Like, how did you know that? He just saw a picture. It wasn't anything subscriptive, just boom, Antietam. And that's right. That's where we were. And McClellan, he had that thing. He had that thing. He could have won.
He had Lee's secret order he divided his troops, and he knew exactly where Lee's troops were, and yet still he was reluctant to commit. And even though he was even reluctant to commit, he almost won. But he delayed just long enough for Jackson to come back in from Harper's Ferry, for them to recombine the troops and defend the last onslaught. And it could have been over. And so you had cautious generals on the one side. You had audacious generals on the other side. And, we are seeing what leadership does. And right now, we are unfortunately being out-generaled in the legislative branch. I have no doubt.
Oh, absolutely.
So look, I really think we're afraid of being outmaneuvered, losing our army, okay? The rationalization is this. This is the way it works. You little people do not understand. This is McClellan's attitude also. Believe me, to Lincoln, you don't understand how the troops work. You don't understand how warfare works. I understand how it does. One small gain at a time is the way we're going to win this, okay? The sand theory, okay? It's better than what we had. At least our armies aren't destroyed. Look what a great victory we had at Antietam. And Lincoln's like, you let them cross back over the Potomac after you had them go? What are you doing? At least we saved the army, and, we haven't lost. Okay, that's the spin. That doesn't win wars, and that's why McClellan was replaced a number of times with other generals who weren't willing to do it until they finally got Grant in. So this is what our leaders don't understand, I think, and they just have not learned the lessons of history, even the recent history. Here it is. We respect and want to stand on principle, at least for a little while, before saying, okay, class, do whatever you want. Get them in, discipline them, teach everybody who's in charge, the teacher, and then if you want to lax up a little, it comes. We've started off with a chaotic class, and there's been no teacher to rein anybody in. Number two, do what you said you would do. Look, if you're saying that we don't understand and we're little school children, then you should have told us that in the first place. Hey, we're not going to be able to replace and repeal and replace. You lied. Why didn't you tell us back then it's going to be hard to repeal and replace?
But here's the thing. And
everybody accepts that now.
On my show where I filled in for Nick Reed out in Springfield, Missouri, 2012 or 2011, Paul Ryan came on my show. He's not Speaker Ryan, but he was Congressman Ryan, came on my show and said that if we don't win, if we don't take the presidency in 2012, we'll never be able to untangle Obamacare. That's what he said. And
they're afraid to take away entitlements.
Right.
Even if it costs a lot more.
That's exactly what it is.
Because they're going to lose the war of perception.
And I'll say this, he's never... someone correct me if I'm wrong, but that whole repeal and replace thing wasn't coming out of his mouth too much.
Well,
I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm just saying I have to believe what he told me back then was true.
But that was the Republican platform, however.
Right.
Repeal and replace.
Absolutely. That's what they ran on for 2016.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And if you're not going to do it, we need to hear. Don't just condescendingly say, "Oh, we can't, and we're not going to try." Doesn't work. We need to put the big rocks in the jar first, okay? If the sand goes in first, it's hard to get the rocks in later. And so we disagreed earlier in the year of why are you doing Obamacare first? And Trump came out and explained, well, we need that, and then the tax. There's other big victories we could have. And the tax plan that Trump has put forth, I think, is excellent. There's a lot of good things on there. They can jump on that.
And they're saying it's DOA in the Senate.
Well, but you got to try.
Right.
You got to push it forward and call them out if they're not. Okay, yes, changes, but incremental and small won't make America great again, just postponing the inevitable. They're not getting this. We need to change the trajectory of our nation.
Who's not getting it?
I think our leaders in both the House and the Senate are not getting it. Okay? You have a mandate, now do it. And here it is. Okay, I gotta bring a biblical passage in here. Revelations 3:16. Now, it depends on which Bible version you're reading, but this is why people get upset. Here it is. Know your deeds. You're neither cold nor hot. How I wish you were one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth.
Right out of my mouth.
Okay? And it goes on to say, you say, I am rich, I have grown wealthy and need nothing, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I mean, what's going on is we need some people, like at the beginning of our Revolutionary War, our beginning of our splitting with the mother country, to stand on principle. People thirst after this, James T. It is incredible the things that we're allowing to happen in this nation. And I think this is a small example of what the Freedom Caucus did. They took a lot of wrath for it. They stood up. But even in this short period of time, we're looking back and saying, oh, okay, maybe they did do the right thing. And even if they don't pass it, will passing what they had on the table really make a big difference to the point it might extend some things out, but it's not going to change the trajectory of healthcare in our nation. We need some people to stand up. So they're doing the right thing. It's not hard to tell who's on the right path or what to support. Figure out what's right and then follow it. If you need to compromise with the classroom later, that comes after you've established the rules.
What is it? When we're going to go back to the founding father, one of our founding fathers, when we come back on the other side, though, I want you to give us a little tease of what Benjamin Franklin was talking about.
Well, I think, in my own mind, because of the allurements and benefits of power and staying in office are so amazing that our elected leaders will do anything they can do to stay there. And the risk of changing that is too great. Okay, that's from me. But that is founded on what Benjamin Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention. Because what he was worried about was the power of avarice and the want of avarice, greediness, and the want of power corrupting those who went into our office. And if you combine the two, money and power, then we're going to have problems. So I want to read some of his quote on the other side, which describes what's going on today perfectly.
So at the Constitutional Congress, you had the
Constitutional Convention, 1787.
1787 Constitutional Convention. You had Benjamin Franklin speaking words of warning that are still resonating today. That's up next. That's up next. We have the Sensei in studio. You're listening to 104.1 KQTH. You are listening to 104.1 KQTH Tucson's News and Talk. We have the Sensei Jeff Utsch in studio. We were just talking. I sent you Tucker Carlson. I think it's Friday show when he had somebody Dreyfus.
Yeah, Richard
Dreyfus on, which I was like not prepared for that. It was incredible interview.
I was out camping. I didn't see that,
right?
But I did see it
got
later.
back into range, right? But yeah, I thought Dreyfus was pretty impressive. But you know,
he is impressive. You know what?
He studied. He went somewhere and got constitutionalized.
He did,
and came back.
He's done at least a little reading.
A little research, something like that. We may have time for that later this afternoon.
So yeah, because there's some things Tucker said, but we want to get into that. He's usually, I really like Tucker, but he went off kind of a
little tangent,
uneducated balance.
Well, and I think what's happening is, I think you don't understand just how good you are, and you don't understand how well my audience, you have educated, the circus to where we catch things that most people don't or won't anymore because we have a better understanding of the Constitution.
Well, let's see what Benjamin Franklin can teach us, because all I do is read what they say and regurgitate.
Yeah,
but here we go. Here we go. Benjamin Franklin Constitutional Convention regarding our elected officials. He says, "Sir, there are two passions which have a powerful influence in the affairs of men. These are ambition and avarice, the love of power and the love of money. Separately, each of these has great force in prompting men to action. But when united in view of the same object, they have in many minds the most violent effects. Place before the eyes of such men a post of honor that shall at the same time be a place of profit, and they will move heaven and earth to obtain it. The vast number of such places it is that renders the British government so tempestuous. The struggles for them are the true source of all those factions which are perpetually dividing the nation, distracting its councils, hurrying it sometimes into fruitless and mischievous wars, and often compelling a submission to dishonorable terms of peace." Benjamin Franklin warned us that if a place of honor at the national level becomes a place of profit, people will move heaven and earth to obtain it, and they will do everything in their power to keep it. And in my opinion, because even the average congressman can go in a pauper and somehow leave very wealthy. And this hasn't always been the case. Remember, when we had President Truman, he wouldn't take a dime from anybody. He was very honorable. He did not let his place of honor become a place of profit. Look at even, we can go into a lot of historical figures in the past that even though they could have taken advantage, their name was not for sale, and they did not profit off of the honor bestowed upon them by public trust. It was you understood moral rule. What has happened? We have let that down, and this is to be expected now, just like it's to be expected that, we were going to replace and repair Obamacare. Of course they didn't mean that. They couldn't have meant that. It means make small adjustments and try to get a few things through. Okay?
That started with Ronald Reagan, I believe, taking the speech money after he was in office. He had a speech. I remember because the left complained mightily. He did a speech in Japan, which you got paid for that. But then it didn't take very long before you had Clinton Inc. profiting even while they were in the White House, selling off, sleeping in the Lincoln bedroom. And now you have President Obama, who just took his third $450,000 check in the last week and a half to do a speech.
Right. And no problem with that at all.
None.
Just none whatsoever.
Well, surprisingly, the left has a little bit of problem with it. The New York Times and another left publication said, it's like you're getting your payoff now. Instead of taking it while you're in office, you're going around doing these okie dokie speeches, these do nothing speeches for an hour and a half and collecting $500,000. That's the payback.
In effect, this is something that I think Congress should weigh in on, because somebody could be bribed while in office. Hey, do this, and when you get out, there could be a wink and a nod. We know these types. I'm not saying Obama did it, but This is something that can go on, absolutely. Hey, when you get out, we're going to do this for you. Do this for us now.
So Benjamin Franklin called that. This is one of the things the founders were worried about.
Right. And look, this wouldn't happen to the extent it is happening now if our government would stay within their proper role of just doing the things that they are supposed to be doing as per the Constitution. But they're not. They've expanded it. So these places of profit are becoming even more influential because people have the ability through their counterparts being hired lobbyists to go to Washington and shake them down. This is what happens. Let's just read this next paragraph too. Here's Benjamin Franklin again. And of what kind of the men, and what kind are the men that will strive for this profitable preeminence through all the bustle and cabal, the heat of contention, the infinite mutual abuse of parties, tearing to pieces the best of characters? Does this remind you of anything? He's got it spot on. He could see it coming because of the example of England and what they already had. He continues, it will not be the wise and moderate, the lovers of peace and good order, the men fittest for the trust. It will be the bold and the violent, the men of strong passions and indefatigable activity in their selfish pursuits. These will thrust themselves into your government and be your rulers. And these too will be mistaken in the expected happiness of their situation. For their vanquished competitors of the same spirit and from the same motives will perpetually be endeavoring to distress their administration, thwart their measures, and render them odious to the people. So even the ones that are vanquished understand that the prize is so big that there is going to be constant ripping apart of character, thrashing one another, beating one another, because the prize is so high, one of avarice, one of power, one of honor, that these things are going to be out of control. Now, he said this even understanding that the powers of the federal government were limited as to what the Constitution gave them. So if he could see what the federal government has grown into now, this statement then would be on steroids. And he would be, why are you wondering, people, why this is getting out of hand? I told you at the very founding what would happen if you let this happen, if you allowed your public servants to basically become prostitutes for their own purposes. And now that the federal government has lost its way and we have allowed it to happen, this is the result. You have the law, the breaking of the law, and this is the consequence because we have not been good stewards of our own inheritance. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, I can't tell you you're wrong. I can't tell you you're wrong. What I'm saying is that
is he brilliant?
I'm just kind of stunned. I'm kind of stunned. This is Benjamin Franklin. Looking at what England was experiencing, being in a unique in position in the birth of a new nation, a new country, was telling us, warning us what we needed to watch out for, what would happen if we did not keep the three branches of government within their bound, the constitutional bounds. What would happen if we allowed for the lust of power to trump
rule of law.
Rule of law.
Okay, and this is 2 paragraphs later, but he says this is going to be the result of that happening. It will be said that we do not propose to establish kings. I know it, so they're debating this. But there is a natural inclination in mankind to kingly government. It sometimes relieves them from aristocratic domination. They would rather have one tyrant than 500. It gives more of the appearance of equality among citizens, and that they like. I mean, this guy...
That's just frightening.
Okay? He said if we let this happen, the end is let's just have one guy have the power so we don't have all this fighting, bashing each other. Everybody's taking the spoils. We got to rely on one guy, and everybody else is equal because people like that better.
Well, that's describing what we had under Obama. That's describing what we're experiencing right now under Trump. You have people that want to have the chief executive have that kind of power.
Right, and we need to be careful of that.
You had Obama say that the Constitution was a hindrance. I would want to do all these things, but the Constitution's in my way. He articulated that.
Well, look, we got to go back. I was discussing this earlier with somebody today, but we need to understand the why, okay? The why we have the Constitution is found in the Declaration of Independence. It's the why we separated from the mother country. It's the why we have governments. It's the what are our unalienable rights. It's the why as to what our potential can be if the structure is set up right. Okay, so that tells us what the vision is to reach our potential as a country. That is the why. The how is the Constitution. So a lot of people, when they read the Constitution, just see it as a building, as a structure that can be changed. But we need to remember the Articles of Confederation was also a building, but it was a crumbling building. And the same people with the same mores at the same time, nobody changed, that didn't do well under the Articles of Confederation, all of a sudden flourished under the Constitution. Because it was, as Gosar just talked about, the process. It set up the proper processes and defined what limits good government could operate within, but we have jettisoned that guideline. And what is happening is the structure is going back to, not the Articles of Confederation, but something different than the strong bulwark, foundation, and monument that we've had of the Constitution. It's transferring into something else. And we are not, so it's not just the processes, that is just a symptom, what Congressman Gosar was talking about. That's a symptom. If you follow the Constitution and the guidelines it's set up, the processes should follow that also.
Again, this is history. We're talking about when we go back to the foundings and we listen to read the readings of the founders, and the quotes of the founders, and we compare it to what we're doing today. It is quite obvious. Well, actually, in this conversation, and listen to you, Jeff, it's easier to connect the dots as to how we've gotten far off.
Look at what's going on the college campuses. We've heard about Berkeley, but who's heard about, University of Colorado, Denver? Larry Reed, one of the friends of the show, the president of the Foundation of Economic Education, which is just fantastic. If you go into feed.org, there's some great literature, talks about freedom. A nation can't remain free and lose its character. So he went there to teach about the Roman Empire and the similarities of its decline. He was only a few minutes. Now, this is Larry Reed. He's the nicest guy. He is like the antithesis of Milo, okay? He goes in and he's like a warm, cuddly bear, never raises his voice, probably in his late 60s, and but extremely knowledgeable. A hero of mine. He goes in there talking about Roman roads and what they did, how they started to tax, and then all of a sudden people were standing up, cussing him out, interrupting his thing. He didn't say anything about anything. And then he was able to finish through these abusive interruptions. But on his way to the car afterwards, he had to walk 3 blocks, and he had a whole crowd following him, throwing the F-bombs, cussing him out.
I didn't know about that.
Yes. And you should probably have him on to tell it first.
I saw the first part of it where he basically, through questions, dismantled them.
No, they followed him to his car. Okay? And this is Larry Reed, one of the nicest men you will ever meet, teaching world history to try to learn lessons. And this is where we're going because we're too afraid to step up and push back. If we're going to defend freedom, we've got to be there. And that is sickening to me.
You're listening to 104.1 KQTH, Tucson's News and Talk. We got Jeff Utsch for one more segment.
Talking about monuments.
Last week when we had the Sensei in studio, we had news that in New Orleans, they were taking down Confederate monuments. They did it in the middle of the night. They actually did it. They were just
that wasn't a Confederate monument. That was actually a white supremacist monument for the police.
Right.
Yeah, I got no problem with that. If it's a strictly white supremacist monument,
but back in the day,
one thing.
Back in the day, sort of, kind of was, whatever. But why did they dress up in masks and all that kind of stuff to conceal their identity in order to take it down? That was kind of wild. But
they also had plans of taking down Jefferson.
Right.
They also have plans of taking down the Lee Monument,
right,
and Beauregard.
Beauregard, yes.
Okay. And see, this is where we have to stop and take a look. Why are they taking down this monuments? Because who's judging? Who is judging? Washington had slaves. Or all of a sudden we're going to throw everything out that he did because he owned slaves? You can never defend slavery, but he was also the father of our nation and did a lot of good things. So we're going to tear down the Washington Monument? How about Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C.? He owned slaves. He also was one of the founders of this nation, wrote the Declaration of Independence, founded the University of Virginia, wrote the Statute on Religious Freedom in Virginia, helped our nation go to the next level, hated slavery, but he owned them, and worked to try to abolish it, but he was ahead of his time. And he got shut down. His uncle, actually, or his relative, Richard Bland, tried to introduce legislation early on, and Jefferson prodded him to do it, but he was ostracized from the Virginia establishment at the time. Even Lincoln. Look, Lincoln had some nasty racist quotes. They're not on the Lincoln Memorial. I've got a lot of them I could quote, but I will spare your audience from them. But they are just, you read them and you go, did Lincoln really say that? He did say it. And he said different things multiple times in the Douglas debates, Lincoln-Douglas debates. Whether he really believed it or was saying it to the crowd, but he did say it. We're going to tear down the Lincoln Memorial? So these things are a part of American history. We need to be really careful about this political correctness, things that are going on, because what happens is oftentimes we let other people decide, be the judge and jury of what's going to allow to be passed and what isn't going to allow to be passed. And if we're going to judge people from those standards, I don't know who would stand up to that scrutiny at all. So, straining at a gnat, but, the whole beam is okay. And this seems to be what's going on, is one side is saying, oh, no, you ran a stoplight. Well, at the same time, they're over here, pillaging a town. And we have to be very careful of those things. It's kind of the same thing that's going on today with our spending, with the spending, what we're doing to the next generation, especially with these breaking down of these monuments, saying they were slaveholders and they're bad people. Okay, you can't defend slavery, but can you defend what we're doing today? And the definition of slavery, when I read all of Lincoln's works, took me 2 years to do it before I took the family back to Gettysburg, in summary is the following, okay? This is Lincoln's definition, but it's compiled. It's not one thing he said. But all of his writings would basically suggest this. When one man consistently eats the bread of another man's labor without his consent. So when one man consistently eats, I would say the majority of another man's bread without his consent, that is slavery. What are we doing to our children? They don't have the vote. We're stealing from them. We look down our noses at the Southern slaveholder. We can't even control our own budget. They're going to have to pay that back. So what degree are we enslaving our own children? Sickening hypocritics that we are today. Hypocrites.
Jeff Utsch. He is our sensei, my friends. He's our sensei. Comes in each week, filters the issues of the day through the Constitution, pulls the history to explain what we are experiencing and why we are today. Just truly brilliant, gifted guy, and he's ours on Monday. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Good to be here.
My friends, you're listening to 104.1 KQTH, Tucson's News and Talk.